Nedbank CEO Mike Brown has singled out the COVID period as one of the most challenging experiences he faced as a leader while at the helm of the bank when the pandemic hit in 2020. He expressed concern at South Africa's ongoing growth challenge, but believes joint efforts between the private sector and the government could go a long way in dealing with the country's structural problems, namely energy and logistics, among others. I sat down with the outgoing CEO, who's been in the hot seat for 15 years, who's set to hand over the baton of leadership to former Absa executive Quinn in May this year. I began by asking him how it feels to leave on a high note after posting 2023 financial results, where headline earnings rose by 11% in what was described as a difficult operating environment in which non-performing loans rose substantially.
It certainly does feel good, and all credit to the Nedbank teams and my exco for how hard people have worked over the last 3 years. We set a number of targets for the end of 2023 as our post-COVID recovery targets, and it was very pleasing to be able to tick all of those off and to see that shareholders have been well rewarded over the last 3 years. We've been fortunate in 21, 22, 23 in that combined period to be the best performing of the bank stocks in South Africa. I think our share price up something like 67% over that period, and including dividends, shareholders had a return of just over 90%. So I'm very pleased about that. But I think more importantly, focused on ensuring that we leave behind, as the chief executive, strong foundations for the new chief executive coming after me, and of course ensuring that there's an absolutely seamless passing of the baton between myself and Jason.
We'll elaborate on that a bit further, a bit later. But now, when it comes to reflecting, were there ever any times when you were concerned as a leader about being able to break through difficult circumstances, like, for example, the COVID period? That was a very unusual time, and people had to come up with strategies to get through.
Look, I think as a leader, there's always both good times and bad times. And certainly if I look back on 30 years in financial services and the multiplicity of challenges that may have happened, be that the sort of small bank crisis in the early 2000s or the global financial crisis, without doubt, the most difficult and challenging period was the second quarter of 2020, which was the COVID crisis, which was both an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, and how do we look after our staff and serve customers on the one hand, but keep them safe and healthy on the other hand? How do we look after customers in their moment of need when many businesses had been shut down, nothing to do with them at all? And then that was combined with quite unprecedented financial market volatility. So that certainly stretched every bit of my leadership and corporate experience. And if we look back with hindsight now, I think both Nedbank and the industry in South Africa came through an extraordinarily difficult period in very good shape.
So now, when you reflect, what do you think are some of the key successes of your leadership, even before becoming CEO, because you were CFO as well?
I think first and foremost, I always point to what we've been able to do at Nedbank, both under Tom Boardman's leadership, and he started this and I continued it, was a disproportionate focus on culture, values, and institutional foundations, all of which I think are absolutely vital for the long-term success of the organization. I look back very proudly on continuing the work that Tom started, in particular on culture and values. And then a couple of other things would come to mind. Firstly, overseeing the managed separation from Old Mutual. As I took over, Old Mutual was going through a process that might have had them selling their 50% shareholding in Nedbank to HSBC. If people go back to 2010, they may remember that. HSBC's leadership changed, and as a result, that transaction didn't happen. But over time, Old Mutual eventually unbundled their 50% stake in Nedbank. They completed that in 2018. So Nedbank today has both the privilege and responsibility of being a proudly independent company determining our own future. So I think I look back very proudly on overseeing that journey, and at the same time keeping a good relationship with Old Mutual as our ex-parent. Also, what we've managed to do, in particular on the technology front, refreshing an entire technology system in a bank is incredibly difficult to do on time, on scope, and on budget, and we will complete that at the end of this year, materially on time, scope, and budget. And as a result of that, we are now number one on Net Promoter Scores, which shows how well our clients are enjoying the digital experience of Nedbank. So I think the foundation of digital leadership has been laid. And then the last thing I would reflect on is Nedbank has always been a leader in ESG and sustainability. And again, that goes back to foundations laid by Richard Loebscher and Tom Boardman, all of whom had tremendous foresight around these things. And I've hopefully been able to build on those. But in particular, Nedbank is currently a leader in sustainable development finance and renewable energy finance in particular. And that is a multi-year growth path, I think, for our business going forward. So several things I look back proudly on, but most importantly, just incredibly honored and privileged to have been able to sit in this chair and work alongside so many great people and teams here at Nedbank.
Yeah. So, Mike, we've had many conversations about the South African economy at large. We're now in the second quarter of 2024. So I want to get your sense right now. What do you still see as significant challenges for the South African economy? And what areas are you confident about where perhaps you weren't so confident before?
Well, I think we can talk about it for a long time, but in short, the South African economy has a growth challenge. Growth in 2023, GDP growth 0.6%, forecast for the next 2 years, maybe at 1 to 1.5%. And that level of GDP growth is simply insufficient to generate enough tax revenues for the fiscus to have enough money to finance the public service, the infrastructure requirements of our country, and the social safety net that we have without continually borrowing. And South Africa's debt levels are really high. So fundamental to all of that is our growth challenge. And fundamental to our growth challenge is effectively the problems in energy and logistics, which on a combined basis would be estimated to cost the economy at least 3, 4, 5% of GDP growth. And a South African economy growing at 3 or 4% is materially different for government finances, per capita GDP growth, job creation, all of those things compared to a 1% economy. So fixing energy and fixing logistics are absolutely vital. And I am confident that the work being done by B4SA, which is the platform working in partnership with government to try and resolve those, will over time have traction. And in particular, if one looks at energy, I think the change in legislation to enable private sector generation at scale is absolutely pivotal to solving our energy crisis. And we can see that in the very strong pipeline of private sector energy projects that are already underway. Unfortunately, they will take 2 to 3 years to connect to the grid, but that is the route to solve our energy problem.
So let's get back to what you were mentioning earlier about the handover of the baton to Jason Quinn. He's your successor. How has that been going? And do you think that you firmly placed that baton in his hands, so to speak?
Well, Jason was on 6 months gardening leave from his previous role at Absa. So he resigned there on the 22nd of November, which means he can only formally join us on the 22nd of May. So in that process to date, clearly we've been giving him a lot of reading to do and been having informal engagements with him, all of which have gone well. We'll only start those formal engagements post the 22nd of May. But everything that has happened to date reaffirms my belief that we will have a seamless passing of the baton. I will remain as a senior advisor for 3 months after May to help facilitate anything that may be required. Given my deep history of Nedbank, I'll continue to do that way beyond 3 months. I'll only be paid to do it for 3 months. So, and perhaps finally, just having just completed our international and domestic shareholder roadshows, all of those shareholders know Jason Quinn well from his Absa role, and we've had very positive reception from all of our shareholders around the Nedbank board's choice of him as incoming CEO.